I am back, and we have a great panel, something I've been looking forward to for a very, very long time. I've been an advocate for third parties and for different strategies of challenging the establishment. And I've been following the work of both of these ladies for a while, and they both advocate for different strategies. So I'm looking forward to this conversation so much. Welcome to Revolutionary Blackout, Dr. Joe Stein and Briahna Gray. Welcome.
Thank you.
So the first part of this conversation, I want to divide this up in a few ways, but the first part, I think we should make the argument on why it's important to advocate for different strategies. And we start with Dr. Joe Stein. Obviously, you put a lot on the line, running and challenging the powers of the establishment, because the smear attacks they hit you with, it has been insane, right? So this is something that you sacrificed on a lot. Either when you could have easily just ran as a Democrat and probably had a nice, cushy political career. So I'm gonna ask you, why do you decide to challenge the two-party duopoly? Why is that something that you're passionate about? So the first part, we just want to really make the argument. So I would love to hear your opinion, and then I want to pass it to Bree after that. So Dr. Joe Stein, I'll start with you.
Great, and thanks, Nick. It's really great to be here, and I've really been enjoying what I've heard from the conference. I've been dropping in at various times during the day, and I feel like I'm hearing so much wisdom and so much courage, and I just say right on and keep it up. And I probably got here for similar reasons. I just really saw our world falling apart, and the ruling parties have gotten us here, and they are not going to get us out. So where it happened for me, I'm not a political animal, and I'm more a social activist, and I got tricked into running for office late in life. I was 50 years old, and I got tricked, and the reason I went for it was because I was so pissed off and desperate. And so at the young age of 50, I felt like, like we're going to hell in a handbasket. Okay, and this is a while ago. This is like 20 years ago, all right? And I think I've only proven that assumption correct in my own experience. And specifically what happened was, so I'm trained as a healthcare provider, and I have worked as a medical doctor for decades, and just saw people not getting care and needlessly getting sick and dying, and so much of it from preventable social causes and the corporate food system that feeds us junk and poison and makes healthy food unaffordable, and the pollution of our air and our water, and the lead in our daily lives, and pesticides and all kinds of stuff, and I became very involved in trying to prevent people from getting sick by properly protecting people from predatory systems that capitalize off of our vulnerabilities, and that screw up our air and our water and our daily lives, and subject us to violence and stress. And that's why we're sick. We are a very sick society. And I became involved in trying to prevent stuff, especially to shut down like polluting incinerators and coal plants that are hurting the most vulnerable people the most. And I got very involved in that work and in trying to work with our elected officials. And after a while, you discover that they pretend to listen to you in private, but then, at the end of the day, they're bought. They're totally bought. And it doesn't matter what great solutions there are at hand to fix the problems with our health and our environment and create jobs while we're at it through recycling economies or green economies and so on. There's just really great stuff. Doesn't matter because, we have the best democracy that money can buy. That's the way the system has always worked, and it's only gotten worse in the last, I'd say, easily 40 years. Certainly over the course of my political lifetime, I've watched it get worse and worse, and money get more concentrated into fewer and fewer hands, and the system get more and more bought out. And I was so just pissed off and frustrated seeing people sick and dying needlessly that I got tricked into running for office. I was running for governor in Massachusetts in the year 2002. And the idea was, well, hey, just talk to a bigger group of people than you can talk to if you're just fighting on the issues at the community level, get to a bigger audience. And I thought, well, might as well try that. Nothing else is working. Might as well, check out what happens when you go the political route. So I went into that. And, I never would have done it had I known what it required. But and once I got through a campaign, suddenly I had a team. And
did you run independent the first time as well?
I got tricked by the Greens. I got approached by the Greens in my home state. And they said, oh, it's easy. Just do what you've been doing. But
I almost got tricked.
Call it a governor's campaign. Right. So I thought, sure, I'll just do what I'm doing. But no, because then suddenly it's not enough just to have some expertise in health and the environment, because then you got to learn about everything else. So I did a crash course and everything else and, and ran. And I went into that campaign just feeling totally hopeless. It was a complete desperation move. And I came out of it just flabbergasted, because I discovered that when people can actually hear that they have choices and and that some of their choices are not sold out, they go for it. They don't need to be convinced. People are already there. The issue is just, how do we get the word out? And, the powers that be made the mistake of including me once in a televised debate. And their second mistake was having an instant online viewer poll. And that viewer poll showed that, unbeknownst to us who were secluded in this little TV studio with no live audience, where I was completely sidelined and, nobody was paying any attention to what I was saying, for healthcare as a human right and free public higher education and the right to a job and good wages. It's that went over like a lead balloon inside the debate studio. Nobody paid any attention to that. But out there in the broadcast world, everybody was paying attention to that. Absolutely. And when I walked out of that debate feeling totally disgusted and exhausted and oh, it's all futile, I was mobbed by the press for the first time and the last time. And they told me that I had won the debate on the instant online viewer poll. And that's what they told me. Now, you could only find that reported in one press outlet the next day. Otherwise, it had been scrubbed. It had been totally scrubbed. But what I learned from that was that it's not like we have to change people's minds. The predatory economy and the desperate state of our climate and jobs and police brutality and the surveillance state and there's surveillance industrial prison complex and the school to prison pipeline, that has changed people's minds, if they ever needed to be changed. I mean, they didn't really need to be changed. It's people are on fire, and they've only gotten more on fire over the last, people are so ready. And so in my mind, it redefined the problem. The problem is not change people's minds. The problem is, how do we break through this silence that is imposed on us, because we are a huge threat. And by we, I don't just mean Greens, although the Greens, I think, are the main vehicle for this, but I mean, parties of integrity, political parties that are people powered. And you can count them on one hand, and they are systematically wiped off the map and have been for as far back as my history goes, which is the early 1900s, progressive, independent, so-called alternative parties. And I don't consider corporate parties like the Libertarians third parties. They're just another shade of the first party, So corporate parties are not it. And likewise, the Andrew Yang's Forward Party, which is also about corporate money, and it makes a few little tweaks around the system. To my mind, that's not third party. We're talking about alternative parties that are independent of corporate money, independent of the oligarchy, and that are responsive to the increasingly desperate needs of everyday working people, oppressed communities, the younger generation, the LGBTQ community, the people who are oppressed. That's actually most of us now, aside from the 1%, which is running the show, and their political, bedfellows that are just trying to keep us quiet and silence us, who are censoring us now, who are attacking and smearing. And in my view, it is a badge of honor if they're attacking you. That means something. That's really great. You're making some waves, and we have to make waves. In the words of Frederick Douglass, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, it never will. And if we're not there in an oppositional way, really making a demand, it ain't going nowhere. And one last point I want to make just early on, which is that it's not just good for third parties, it's good for progressives anywhere, even inside the Democrats, because if you don't have another, a bad cop outside of the system, you are powerless because you're always going to be bought out. You're always going to be marginalized. And I think any progressive that is worth their weight needs to be also fighting for the right of third parties to exist, to get on the ballot, and above all, for us to have access to ranked choice voting and proportional representation, because without that, they will extort our votes. They extort our votes with fear every time. And it's really hard for most people to overcome that unless you are a geek and you really study up on the issues and you see that, that third parties don't take votes away from anybody. Those votes don't belong to anybody. And what an outrageous thing to imply that you are entitled to those votes. I mean, for Hillary Clinton and the DNC to say they were entitled to green votes, what's with that? Since when are politicians entitled to our votes? They have to earn our votes. Our votes belong where they belong. But for all 1.4 million Greens that voted, or I should say 1.4 million people who voted Green in 2016 for president, there were 100 million people. Yes, and kudos to those who had the strength to not only do it, but to say that they did it. You have my forever admiration. Those votes were tiny compared to the people who didn't vote. That was the largest voting bloc, was people who voted with their feet by refusing to vote for the two candidates being stuffed down our throats. And that's the problem. The problem is not the people who oppose a predatory, exploitive, dead-end, dying system. We're the heroes here. The problems are the people who try to shut us up and keep running us over the cliff, which is what they're trying to do.
Well said, Jill. There's so much to break down. Sorry, let me mute. Oh, there we go. I just fixed the audio issue. But there's so much to break down there. There's so much I'm going to get back to. Especially, we're going to talk about the way the Democratic Party treated you. I spoke to some Green Party officials earlier today, and they actually learned from their mistake, because you explained how earlier you was on the debate, and that opportunity allowed you to shift the Overton window and shift the expectations of the country. And they spoke about that, and they didn't, and Howie was at a disadvantage because they did not make that mistake again. They completely shut him out. So we're going to get back to that later, because I want to talk to you in detail with that. And I appreciate your patience, Bree. I want to get you in this conversation as well. And I want you to make the argument, because we both vote for Jill Stein, and I've seen you take a ton of grief for that as well. So I would love to hear your mindset. Why do you think it's important to advocate for third parties, or at least just other strategies in general? What's your thoughts, Bree?
I was told when I voted for you, Dr. Stein, in 2016, I took a selfie in the line, and I had my Jill Stein 2020 pin pinned to my lapel of my coat, and I made it my Facebook photo. And I kept it up as my Facebook photo even after Trump won. And I didn't really think anything of it until people started DMing me saying how brave I was to have this in my Facebook photo, which really tells you what people's frame of mind was. It didn't even occur to me for a second, one, because I'm a New York voter and New York hasn't gone red since before I was born, but also that ideologically people would have the chutzpah to kind of say to your face that your vote belongs to somebody else, or the idea that my vote would have gone to Hillary Clinton. I promise you there's no conceivable universe in which I was ever going to vote for Hillary Clinton. It just isn't a part of my journey. So I am the reason being is because I was raised to believe that your vote does mean something. And 2016 for many people, I think, was a bit of an ideological awakening, where it became clear, if it wasn't already, the extent to which we weren't being presented with the options in terms of the realm of the possible in politics. There was a lot of smoke and mirrors in which it was represented that the Democrats were offering up what was the realm of the possible. And to date, when you talk to liberals, they'll also often say things like, well, I just want to get things done. Like, we all want these things in the abstract utopia, but I just want to get things done. And I think for many people, the Bernie movement exploded that veil that was being used to obscure how many pragmatic solutions there were to the problems that Democrats like to articulate in order to get us to the ballot box and then do nothing about. And once you see your shadow in Plato's cave or whatever, like you can't go back. And so for me at that point, there was no alternative than voting for Jill Stein, beyond which I really enjoyed her as a candidate. I don't think people say that enough. I think oftentimes people talk about their Green Party votes as that was what was left kind of a vote. And I want to say that I affirmatively enjoyed what Dr. Stein had to say. I listened to that debate that she's referencing as part of my research in 2016 and trying to get the root of things and understand things. I appreciated her going on podcasts in hostile environments. I remember you going on Politically Redacted, which was with Hari Kondabolu and W. Kamau Bell, which at the time was my favorite podcast. And you flipped them both from being rather antagonistic and snide about you the week before to saying that they were going to vote for you in California. And I admired your persuasiveness. I admired your integrity. I admired your ability to manage people who are coming to you in bad faith and hostilely. I admired and was proud to vote for you as a candidate. And now, today, we're in a situation where the Biden administration threatens to make people believe that there's nothing to be done. People are very demoralized. I go back and forth on my own podcast because sometimes I think if I cover any of the stuff that's so depressing and dispiriting, people might decide just to give up and throw their hands in the air. And how much, do I even want to do another environmental episode, things being as bleak as they are? But I also think it's important to remember what Dr. Stein said, which is that we are not in the realm of convincing people. We're in the realm of removing the veil. Because people are already convinced. They don't need to be convinced that a policy is a good idea. They don't need to be convinced that people need Medicare for all. We are still in a health and economic crisis, even though for electoral reasons, I think the Democratic Party would like us to forget that fact. And so there is a mode of activism that is about awareness that I think a lot of us on the left can see through. That, we're making people aware. Okay, well, people are aware, but being aware of leukemia doesn't solve cancer. Being aware of police violence doesn't mean that we get a George Floyd Justice and Policing Act or qualified immunity or bail reform, any other things that need to get done. And I think that's why it's so important to have independent media and shows like yours, Nick, so that we can blast through this idea that what we need to do is just talk to people about the problems and convince people to want Medicare for all and start articulating ways in which we can start to chip away and knock huge blocks off at the institutional barriers that are keeping people in this world where they think that all they can hope for is the pragmatic solution of Pete Buttigieg telling us to buy a hybrid car or what have you, as the last polar bear floats off on the last ice cap on Earth.
There's one thing I want to add, and now I'm gonna open the conversation. Then we move to the second part because there's something that as third-party advocates, or at least I am for sure, always want to debunk the nonsense about a wasted vote. And I love how Bree said there's no way I could ever vote for Hillary Clinton. That's my mindset. There's quite literally no reality where I could vote for Jim Crow Joe, who has done unbelievable amount of damage to the Black community. So now let's talk about what is a wasted vote. Now, let's say you're a healthcare advocate like me, and your grandpa and your grandma died prematurely because we didn't have healthcare. Now, you, as a healthcare advocate, vote for someone because they say, we're going to at least give you a public option. Let's say you vote for that person, and then they abandon the public option. Do you feel like you spent your vote? And I'm just asking you guys this. Now, and another thing, let's say you think, oh, Nick, you're just a far left Marxist. The Democratic Party is not as evil as you think it is. Okay, let's brainstorm a little bit, okay? I live in Missouri, a red state. Do you guys know what happens every year? Even if I vote for a Democrat, if I vote for a Democrat in Missouri, what happens? Oh, there are more votes for the Republican, so this state has gone red, which means my vote is what? Doesn't count. It doesn't count. Under this system, the idea that we have votes that have any power as a proletariat is beyond ridiculous. Beyond ridiculous. And I hear people always bring up all the challenges of a third party, and we acknowledge that those things exist. But to me, anything that marches towards our demands, which to me is voting for a party that has reparations, for example, on their platform, anything that would even move that by an inch is way better than voting for someone who destroyed our community like Jim Crow Joe, in a party that I would call the greater and more effective evil, right? But before I move to the next part, I want to open the panel. Do you guys have anything you want to respond to? Anyone say here? I'll start with Joe Stein. Oh, sorry. Sorry, I had to unmute you. Sorry, go ahead, Joe Stein.
Okay, so you're asking like my reactions to
anything else you want to add?
Oh, God. Well, I'll just add that for me, I think for all of us, in fact, kind of the elephant in the room here is that this isn't standing still, and it's going in the wrong direction. And, oligarchy is getting more powerful, and the, billionaires increased their wealth by $2 trillion in the United States since the pandemic. And, and some 8 million people were added to the ranks of poverty, and that's just like one dimension of this. We got a war going on right now, which could go nuclear in the blink of an eye. And, and the US has actually led the way in dismantling nuclear treaties and making this all much more dangerous. And I have to say the war that's going on right now is a proxy war. It's not just,
exactly,
it's not just Russia, and Putin. You can't just Putinize this. Yes, it was terrible. And it is terrible what's going on, but it is part of much greater terribleness. And that is this proxy war that's been going on in Ukraine, and a civil war as well within Ukraine, as well as being a proxy war between Russia and the US, in which the Ukraine people are the sacrificial lambs. And NATO has been marching to Russia's border for the last 30 years. This is a Cuban Missile Crisis in reverse. And we would be going ballistic if Russia was on our borders and, installing nuclear capable missiles. And, it's like thinking is being so constrained right now by the corporate media, and we are being goaded into a war, the grounds for which has been laid for many, many years here, and the Russia gating that went on over the last...
They try to tie you with that too.
Yeah.
That was one of the things they used to attack you. There's one thing I wanted to show you, because there is the point during that, as you mentioned, when you had that debate, when people started noticing you. And I shared this before, and I would love to get you guys' reaction, because I've seen this coordinated attack by the media, and I've seen a lot of people fall for it. I've seen so many people fall for it where, let me dig this up. I found the wrong link. They fall for it, and the question is, why there's so many progressives, why there's so many people that are hesitant towards supporting third parties? Why is there that hesitancy to do that? Because as I described, if you vote against your values, that is a wasted vote. And there's a point where Joe Stein, and I'm gonna pull it to see, I had the wrong link, but Joe Stein at one point hit 7%. And we talk about what happens when you hit 5% as a third party. And not even considering what it would mean as a block, as a left, who had like 5 to 10% of a vote that could be up for grabs if you adopt a progressive policy. So there was like this coordinated psyop to get people to say, "Oh, you waste your vote." So I'm gonna ask you guys this: why is there's so much hesitancy for so many people to vote for third party? Because a lot of people that talk a big game, like when they say, "Oh, Bernie or bust. But when you look at the numbers just don't add up. Bernie had a massive movement. But when you look at Howie Hawkins getting like 0.1% of the vote, that means statistically a lot of Bernie people hedged. So why do you think
all of them did?
Yeah, exactly.
Statistically, in 2016, I'm not exactly sure about 2020, but statistically in 2016, more Bernie supporters fell in line and voted for Hillary Clinton than Hillary Clinton supporters in 2008 fell in line and voted for Barack Obama.
That is embarrassing to me. That is such an embarrassing statistic. And people with I still remember during the 2020 election, while I was making the same arguments, everything that I predicted would come true did, because you guys gave up all your leverage immediately, right? So now we had a guy who was promising, he already said he was going to fund the police more. He already was running to Trump's right when it comes to foreign policy. Now we see how he doubled down on this stuff. So this kind of is something else I want to talk to Jill Stein, because another reason why I am a third-party advocate, because we got to be practical. This is what Bree said. We really got to be practical about our decisions. And the people who actually advocate for the two-party duopoly are not being practical. What I mean by this is if you're anti-war activist, meaning you want to end war, decrease the military budget, we can acknowledge there is no route through the two-party duopoly through that, right? So if you're anti-war, your only path is by supporting the third parties. And that's what actually got me support to the Green Party before anything. Before I was socialist, I voted Jill Stein, I voted for you in 2016 because I was anti-war. And there's no way that I was going to vote for a war criminal like Hillary Clinton. So I would love to get your perspective, Dr. Stein. Why do you think there's still like this hesitancy? And like me and Bree say, it's a fact that the giant Bernie movement caved. Why do you think people are so scared to cast that vote? Why do you think the two-party duopoly still have this hold on people?
You know, when I look at my experience with people, you know, and I look at who, you know, who is awake, you know, and I don't mean like woke, liberal woke, but I mean just like who's looking at what's going on around them and just like recognizing that we are going over a cliff, whether it's on climate or crushing racial inequality or, you know, the kind of the economic crisis. When I look at who actually stands up to do something about it, it's usually people who don't, you know, people who don't have privilege to hold on to. And people who have privilege are very reluctant to rock the boat because it's working for you. Even if you don't like it, it's working. You still have privilege. And when I look at who breaks through, it's, you know, it's people who don't have privilege, that aren't blinded by their own, you know, by their blind self-interest. And, you know, so that kind of like leads me to think that the mobilization is inevitable. It's just a question of when, because we are, you know, we are being thrown under the bus more and more, you know, so like they can throw $14 billion at Ukraine, but they can't pay the child tax, you know, fund the child tax credit or COVID, you know, public health measures. They can't do that, but they can always throw money into war, you know. So, and now we've got inflation on top of it and, you know, just skyrocketing inflation. And now you've got gas prices that are going through the roof because, not just because of the war, but also because of the sanctions, you know, which they don't want you to think about these, you know, and food prices are going to skyrocket, especially in, you know, in the global South. I mean, we are absolutely heading for, you know, and we'll be lucky if somebody doesn't trip over a nuclear tripwire, because they're all over the place. We have 2,000 nuclear weapons on hair trigger alert. And it's not like you can just exchange one or two of them. No, it's like once you cross the nuclear threshold, that's it. And it's curtains. And, you know, and it's like that's only beginning to sink in to people who did not grow up with the nuclear movement. You know, there was a big awakening back in the, I think it was the 80s. There was a huge awakening around the nuclear movement. And people who didn't live through that, you know, are just like learning about this for the first time because the issue has been just really kind of driven underground. So at any rate, I guess my point is that we're really up against the wall. We've got these really existential crises that are just barreling down on us right now, and people are feeling them already, and they're going to feel them more and more. So, in my view, it seems to me it's like totally inevitable. The uprising is happening. It's really suppressed right now because people are so really confused about what's going on with the war, and they're being kind of goaded into this jingoism. And so they're kind of confused, and they don't really understand what's going on because the media is purposefully, misleading people and keeping people in the dark. But that's only going to go on for so long. People are hurting. They're going to be hurting like way more, no matter how they feel about the war. The system is crashing and burning in all kinds of ways. And to my mind, we are going there. And it's like we have to build it because they are coming. They are coming. We have to build it. And I don't even ask myself anymore, what is the magic breakthrough? The point is we just look for breakthroughs all over the place. You just have to be ready, and you want to be on record before the system tips. It's tipping, and you want to be on record for what it is that we have to do. And you want to find all kinds of ways to be reaching out and having human relationship building conversations with people to ease that transition, because it's a really painful wake up that we're in for.
I remember you mentioned earlier, kind of in a joking way, but I can tell there was a little bit of seriousness there, where you said people kind of tricked you into running. And I want to ask you, is there a level of regret in terms of running for like office? We all know the kind of attacks that you were subjected to. Is there a sense of regret, and what kind of strategy do you advocate now? Because you listed a ton of problems that we discussed on the show as well, that I think we need an immediate response for as a proletariat, right? So is there a little bit of regret, and what kind of strategy that you endorse? And I'm gonna ask Bree the same kind of strategy question after you, Stein.
Zero regret. I mean, maybe my family really regrets it. And, I think they consider me kind of a prisoner because I do this all the time, and I'm fighting the Federal Election Commission right now, which wants me to pay them back for, for public funding. And this is after 3 years of fighting the Senate Intelligence Committee. And all of this costs you an arm and a leg, just to Ralph Nader got hit with 20 lawsuits at once that tried to throw him off the ballot. And, this is part of the playbook of suppressing political opposition and, independent competition. This is just how it works. And I never thought this was going to be easy. This isn't something I did early in life, and I only did because I saw no other options. And I really saw the writing on the wall for where we are going. And I feel like my intuitions 20 years ago have only been confirmed over and over and over again. And in fact, things have gone to hell in a handbasket in many ways, much faster than I ever feared. And, I don't want to kind of kiss the world goodbye without having done everything I could. And, before I got political, I actually I had this really weird kind of accident. I tore a blood vessel in my brain, and I was in the hospital in the neurology ward for about 10 days. And it wasn't clear whether this was going to get fixed or not. And I was looking at potentially like a devastating stroke at age 40. And, I had a lot of time to think about what I was going to do if I actually got better. And I got better, And so when I got better, I had no doubt about kind of why we're here, and I felt like for me, it was really, I had young kids at the time, and, they're grown up now, and I have a granddaughter, and I don't want to say goodbye without feeling like I've done everything I can for all the granddaughters and all the grandchildren and all the brothers and sisters out there, who are kind of confronting what I had the very mixed blessing of confronting, 30 years ago. And, So I have zero regrets. That doesn't mean it's easy, but what is easy, in this world? Nothing is easy in this world. And I can't imagine, it's like, did you say, or did Bree? Somebody made a comment about once you kind of see what's going on, you can't unlearn it. And, I'm glad to be fully engaged in the fight.
Absolutely.
And like, what is that fight? Let me just show you some of what's going on. And I was so like, I'm very much in tune with what you're doing as the Revolutionary Blackout Network, because can you even see this? And is it, all right. So this is an Earth Day strike. An Earth Day strike on April 22nd for People, Planet, and Peace. Why a strike? Because we've got to learn how to strike,
Yes.
Like you said, you got to start somewhere. You need a general strike. You're not going to have a transformative social movement without a general strike. So we thought, let's use the opportunity of Earth Day. We're supposed to think big on Earth Day. Well, guess what? Earth Day is no longer just about the climate crisis. It's also about the wars that are killing people all over the place, that are also killing the planet, that are, the U.S. military is the biggest single organizational contributor to greenhouse gases and all the rest. And then we got nuclear weapons, which could also just take us out like that, long before we even get to, the ultimate climate change. So, so that's what we're doing. And you can go to Earth Day Strike 2022.org and just put on the map whatever you're going to be doing. And the idea is for us to be building solidarity across movements. Let's just use this opportunity. And if you can do a school strike, or if you're one of those who are engaged in a work strike, we want to support you. And the idea is, let's just lift up and link arms, because we have critical mass. If we can overcome the divide and conquer thing going on out there, let's overcome divisions and let's exercise critical mass. By the way, we have an agenda here, which is sort of like a global Green New Deal. And so this isn't just like, oh, let's have a strike and keep our fingers crossed. This is like, let's have a strike with an agenda for what it is that needs to be done, and it's an emergency World War II scale Green New Deal with the right to a good union job and a just economy and a just transition to 100% clean renewables by 2030, an economic bill of rights, Medicare for all, free public higher education, right to housing, yada, yada. It's the whole 9 yards. It's like, we're not going to get out of here alive if we just do the window dressing. We got to really do the change. And we have very limited time to do that change. The clock is ticking. The clock is ticking in every dimension right now. And we need to just cut to the chase. So let's fix it.
Well said. You got me hyped. And I told you guys, this is why I told you guys I missed Jill Stein on the public sphere, because I'm glad that you brought that to my attention, that Earth Day strike. Because that's something that we about to promote the hell out on this channel. Because you guys know what we are about here on RBN. And you said everything. I have nothing else to say other than that, because we promote General Strike Summits. We're gonna do General Strike Summit 2 later this year.
Oh, awesome.
So that's just something. I have nothing else other than say that was just amazing. I want to get Brian. You can respond to anything that Jill Stein was mentioning, and we can talk about strategy as well.
There's a question you asked earlier about why you thought that the Bernie people fell in line. Sorry, sometimes I forget to look at my camera because I want to look at you guys down here on my computer. I think that it's important to note that I think Trump played a big role in people's fear that he represented something unprecedented. And I think there was a lot of shaming that was made more effective, shaming of, left voters who are Bernie voters, who are potentially Stein voters, around the issue of Donald Trump. And my observation back in 2016 was that, in particular, my white liberal friends were very persuasively persuaded by that line of attack. And they would say things to me, but the marginalized, and it's going to be so bad for people under Trump. And I would put to them that we call these groups marginalized groups because they are already being subjugated under the status quo. And I would ask them, as I did Noam Chomsky, what the off-ramp was. I'm not angry with anybody. I'm not trying to fight with anybody, but okay, if we vote blue no matter who this time, when's the last time? And I might be willing to hear this argument if you have some kind of theory for when that's not going to be the case, when the Republican Party isn't going to offer some legitimate threat. I'm not saying the threat isn't legitimate, but what's the off ramp? Because they're getting worse and worse in part because we keep voting blue no matter who, and there's absolutely no incentive to ratchet left. There's only incentives to ratchet right. And nobody, including Professor Chomsky, who I admire, was able to answer that question. And I think putting that question to people is a starting block to having the broader conversation about why it's so important to have third parties. And when I was trying to talk to my peers in 2016, I think that something that was made it more persuasive was talking about what you can get if you get to 5%. Because the pragmatic liberal always wants to talk about how, well, it's not really going to happen. It's like, okay, I'm not voting necessarily for Jill Stein to win, although obviously I would love for that to happen. I'm also voting for the Green Party to get 5% of the vote, because this is how much easier it's going to be for Jill Stein when she runs 4 years from now, or whomever it is. And so I think it's important to recognize that we got bamboozled, and a lot of people got peer pressured because of the threat of Trump. He may or may not be back for another round. But I think we have to keep putting to people that the comparisons that you made between Biden and Trump, the crime bill, the fact that Donald Trump made these kind of weird but legitimate efforts toward police reform with Van Jones and Kim Kardashian, and in some ways are more progressive than Joe Biden getting on the State of the Union and saying, fund them, and hiring the nation's self-described top cop as his vice president. We have to keep pushing that and ask people when it's going to be that they stop being susceptible to a kind of shaming that is ultimately causing more harm to the very groups that they purport to want to protect, because it solidifies and upholds the status quo under which they are suffering.
Well said, Bree. And I also want to dive in to add to what you were saying. Why, especially when you look at the lesser two argument that the liberal class was using, it didn't make sense at face value. Like, how can I have Trump derangement syndrome? This is what led me to vote for Jill Stein, Howard Walker in 2020. Trump derangement syndrome didn't make sense. Trump was just one of many. Trump was friends of the Clintons. The establishment hated Trump because Trump did what they did. They beat them at their own game. He was no more extreme than them. And if you knew the history of Joe Biden, if you know the black bodies that he's responsible for, if you knew the war against children and the war against the working class that the Clinton waged in the 90s, like, where's the lesser two evils start? That's why I love how you frame it like that, Bree, because this is something I ask people, and no one ever passed this test yet, right? Because no one in the Democratic Party, because this is like the established litmus test. You can't be anti-gay, right? If you run as a Democrat and you're like super anti-gay, you'll be canceled. No one will vote for you, right? And I ask people straight up, like, if there was a Democrat that was running, and he was running on a, like, not like a hidden anti-gay agenda, but he was openly like, I'm not for a gay marriage, I'm actually going to roll back rights, would you vote for him? Every single time I ask someone that question, they say, oh, no, I wouldn't vote for them. Okay, very interesting. So I agree with you. I would never vote for someone like that. But I will also never vote for someone who is funneling money that is responsible for the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people. That's just a red line for me. I wouldn't vote for anyone who increased the police state like Jim Crow Joe has done. So I asked these people the follow-up question: why is the line in the sand the gay community, but not the Muslim community, not the black community of the Democratic Party? No one passed the test. I would love to hear the answer to that. No one can. The only response you could have is, I think X lives mean more than this lives, right? I want to get Jill Stein in here as well. How do you usually, and what's your thoughts in general on people who like super reliant and always push this lesser two evils ideology, and how can we continue to communicate to defeat that?
I have like former colleagues and friends that I used to try to persuade. And then I just realized in the time that it took me to change their mind, I could reach 100 people or maybe 500 people who don't need to have their mind changed. They need to feel empowered to like actually stand up and do something. So to my mind, the hand wringers, you know, the, oh, do I dare to eat a peach people, are not the priority. They're just like way down on the list, and like, don't even waste your time. And I generally feel that way about a lot of people of privilege. I usually do not spend time trying to persuade them that their privilege is going to be very short-lived and is ultimately going to fail them, and you know, and is very oppressive in a bigger frame. I don't even waste my time.
Yeah,
I just,
I understand that. That
I,
makes sense.
you know, I have, when I was running, I never found someone under 30, you know, who had student debt, who didn't like jump at the chance to cancel their student debt. There was no persuasion involved, you know, or people who really need health care. They were ready, you know, and they didn't need complicated arguments about lesser evil or greater evil. It was like, oh my God, you know, it was like my experience on that live instant online viewer poll, you know, it's just like, say what we can do and have a plan for doing it. That's why, you know, to my mind, it's like, you know, we need to be out there in our communities grappling with what matters. And it might be, you know, the need for drug treatment on demand, or it's, you know, extend the ban on evictions. You know, it's not just Earth Day. You know, it's all of us on Earth Day, and I think it's about starting with a day, you know, and having an event where we're going out to reach out to people, and then we keep doing it, and then we keep doing it. I mean, and that's really why I joined a political party.
Yes.
Aside from being tricked into it, but you know, that's why I stayed with a political party, because I realized that this is, at the end of the day, this is all about coalitions, and it's about being bigger than your issue or what's, you know, really critical in your community. We have to work together in a bigger way, and a party is a way to grapple with that. Parties are very flawed, they're very imperfect, but we need them, you know, and they will kind of wax and wane, depending on all kinds of things. But, you know, I'm among a whole lot of people I know, we can't leave the Green Party because there's just nothing else out there that, you know, that is people powered and that has the right agenda, and you know, and believes in grassroots activism and is doing the right stuff. And, you know, I hope another party comes along. I mean, and I should mention Peace and Freedom, because we're actually working hand in hand with Peace and Freedom in California, which I think is really great. And it's proof of principle. There are other good parties out there, but they've been beaten back, you know, in their heyday for the peace movement. They were like, I don't know, maybe 10 states across the country. And then they got beaten back. Like most people-powered parties get beaten back. The Labor Party was established, you know, Tony Mazzocchi, back around the same time the Greens were established. And they had way more financial support and institutional support, but they could never get off the ground because it's not easy. And you have to like really take it on the chin over and over again. You're going to get assaulted, you're going to get smeared, you're going to get really beaten down. And it's like, how committed are you to this? It's not easy, but Greens don't walk away. And I think the reason for that is, you know, we really emerged from this, you know, kind of this awakening about what's happening to Mother Earth and its caretakers, Indigenous people. You know, these were really part of the founding principles of the Green Party, which came out of, I think it was New Zealand, where it actually began. And, you know, it's like once you see what's going on, you can't unsee it. And social conditions will come and go, but when the environment goes down, it doesn't come back. And maybe that's why the Greens have had staying power, because to give up is, it's really to just kind of roll over on the railroad tracks. And
Right.
most of us aren't ready to do that. So, yeah, I think it's really about a party. And, pick your party. I don't care what party, just let it be a people-powered party, not a corporate party, and not a party that is abusing you. And I should make that point too, that
Yes.
that people are regularly abused. They're in an abusive political relationship. And it's hard to wake up to that and recognize that you are being abused and you're being really beat up. And then the party's coming back to you at election time and saying, oh, we really care about you and we're really going to, give you respect and all that. And then they don't again, and at some point you have to break up with this abusive relationship. And we need a political party that allows us to struggle together, and we're not always all going to be on the same page, and we're going to have splits and factions, and that's forever happening in small parties. But it's way better that happen than that they all get bought out by the casino magnate who's sponsoring the candidates and dictating to them what the policies are going to be.
Absolutely. And I really love the approach that like Cashapp and Sawant has to third parties, using them as a people party, a people power movement, a working class movement. We had a March for Medicare for All last year, and one thing that I love that I saw this. When I gave my speech at the Kansas City March, we had the People Party people there, the Missouri People Party, and we also had the Kansas City Green Party people. Kansas City Green Party people there. So we had both third parties there, and you know what happened? We just got along, and we was talking about things we can do for a local community. That's what I love to see. Like, I don't care if it's Green Party, People Party, Socialist Alternative, this or that. As long as we are a working class movement, and it's not like this like competition, ego chasing thing that I have seen, which I don't like. I disapprove of that. I just don't understand. My mindset was like, we might as well take over the Green Party. But even if you don't want to do that, let's come together as a left movement, put a power challenge the establishment as well. I also want to share this because this is what I was about. This is what I was about to share with you guys, and I also want to get into the story because we got about maybe like 10 minutes left. I want to really talk about like the censorship that you went through, Joe Stein, because this is the receipt I was going to show you guys, and this is kind of like the start of like this big propaganda war. I remember I was following the Joe Stein campaign very closely at the time. I didn't have a platform back then, but I followed it really closely at the time, and I still remember this. This is why I went back and digged it up, because I knew about what happens if a third party got 5%, right? So then, when the establishment made the mistake. Again, Joe Stein to me mainstream interviews. They didn't make the mistake again when Howard Hawkins ran, which really hurt him. When do you ever see him on mainstream media? Didn't happen because they made the adjustment. Because at one point, Joe Stein hit 7% among registered voters. I would also love to get Briahna to start on this as well. But I remember it was around this time. This is when I really started seeing people escalate their attacks on third parties. This is when I really start seeing people say, "Oh, you're gonna waste your vote if you vote for a third party." So, do you see the same thing going on? What was your general reaction when you see people smear third parties, and what's your reaction to that, Bri?
Can I answer the last question first?
Yeah, absolutely. Take it whatever order you want to
go. So when you mentioned the analogy about asking your friend about if they would vote for someone who didn't pass what I think is a good litmus test, which is to not have a bigoted person on the Democratic Party ticket, and they weren't able to reconcile that with why draw a line in the sand for gay marriage, but not for decarceration, or reparations or housing for all or healthcare for all or student debt cancellation or whatever it is. It made me think of an interview that I recently did with Marcel Dixon, who's running for Congress against Jim Clyburn. And we had this interesting interview where he talked about the district, which very few people do. Jim Clyburn comes from one of the poorest districts in the country, has done little to nothing to serve the predominantly Black community that he presides over. And at the end of the interview, Marcel Dixon said some things about his own attitude toward abortion rights that would similarly violate the litmus test of most liberals, most Democrats, most leftists, most everybody.
I talked to
And
this
what I
guy
thought was
too.
really, I thought it was an interesting test case. It was an interesting test case, whatever you think of Marcel. And I think that most leftists acknowledge that, you know, Jim Clyburn is a real problem. And you might even agree that because you don't think that Marcel Dixon is single-handedly going to be able to do anything one way or the other about abortion rights, they're imperiled, but for reasons completely independent of Marcel Dixon, that it might be worth it to get Jim Clyburn out than to have this guy in who doesn't believe in the right to choose, even though that is, you know, abhorrent to many of us on the left. But it was really interesting to watch my audience kind of react and engage with that, because people were really wrestling with it in a way that they aren't normally made to do because of how much my audience hates Jim Clyburn. And I just thought that was a really fascinating test case and a question that I don't know that most people are really ready to answer. Would you vote if you lived in Clyburn's district? If you're a leftist, would you campaign for, give money to, advocate for Marcel Dixon despite him being pro-life? I don't know. It's just
And
interesting.
he also had some other. I don't know if you noticed, but I actually interviewed him a long time ago before he even announced his candidacy, because he had that viral video when he was calling out Jim Clyburn, and we talked to him, and I was like, immigration, policing. I was like, we was like, man, and so that is an interesting question that you bring up, Bree, because I have Jim Clyburn derangement syndrome. I want to admit, I am like Eric Adams is my new derangement right now. So man, that would be a tough one.
And they'll tell us to like vote for Amy McGrath, right? Centrists will often come up with this person who's just barely not a Republican and put us in the position of compromising all of these values with the goal of getting the real Republican, the Republican on paper, out of office. And nobody flinches. Nobody questions why we should vote for somebody like her if it means, you know, getting what's his face out of office in West Virginia, or Joe Manchin out of office in West Virginia, or whatever it is. So it's an interesting thought experiment, and it's a difficult one to have with most groups, because most people hear you articulate a potential willingness to vote for someone who doesn't believe in the right to choose. And you know how it is. We've all been called every name in the book. I have been personally accused of, as you have, Dr. Stein, of personally imperiling the right to choose, even though, you know, it's not Ruth Bader Ginsburg. You know, it's nobody but the two of us, apparently. You know, like, we know how sensitive these conversations are, but it is interesting. And there's a nativist kind of vein of this among ADOS, but I think there is a legitimate kernel here of why is it that the litmus test, the line in the sand, seems to be with respect to certain communities and not others. And I don't say that in a way to put us against each other, because obviously we should be supporting each other's interests. The question that is being put forward by people is, why does it seem to be a one-way street? That's not an argument against supporting somebody else's interests. It's asking why there's not the reciprocity that I think should exist between marginalized communities. And you see that when you hear Black people frustrated about the Stop Asian Hate bill, not because they don't want to stop Asian hate, but because they don't understand why, given how big we percentage of the population are and how faithfully we vote for Democrats, that George Floyd was tabled preemptively. Joe Biden set a 1-year anniversary deadline for passing the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. No one told him to do that, by the way, but he set himself his own deadline and then missed it. And the night before he missed it, trotted out all of these civil rights leaders. Al Sharpton tweeted, you know, I'd rather have a good bill than a timely one. Like, nobody asked you. We're getting neither. We're getting no bill. There's nothing. And despite, as I've said a million times before, that being the largest protest movement in American history, and all of these, you know, Black lives in the street protesting in the summer 2020, get bupkis for it. And that's why part of why I'm so supportive of third parties is because I think there needs to be electoral consequences for people. And I think it's much better to articulate your dissatisfaction with the Democratic Party electorally by voting for the alternative that actually represents you, as opposed to just staying home, because your non-vote will be characterized as apathy. Mm-hmm. And you will get judged and blamed, and people with vote or die t-shirts will tell you that your ancestors fought and died for these rights, you know, My ancestors didn't fight and die for me to vote for Jim Crow Joe. That's what I know to be true in my spirit.
Goddamn right. You goddamn right. And I'm gonna just add one more thing, and then I know we're probably gonna get ready to transition to the next segment here soon. Just to piggyback on what Bria is saying, it's not oppression Olympics, it's solidarity. It's solidarity. And there's this thing where people demand unity. And on the channel, one of the main themes that we hit on is I don't like unity. I don't like it. Like, I'm for solidarity, not unity. And what a lot of people expect out of the Black left, and I've seen this with a lot of conversations that you had as well, Bree, is people expect the Black left, the Black anti-establishment, to immediately concede. And the reason why I bring up the gay issue, because that's an established litmus test. It's not to weigh the struggle of a Black man versus a gay man. It's just, why is the gay man struggle is like, they never, like, you would never ask them to put their oppression on hold to make the white suburbia feel comfortable. That's
well,
what
also yeah. I also think it's because the establishment can very forcefully take that position, because there are many rights that members of the LGBT community are fighting for that do have material implications for, you know, the plutocracy. However, the ones that have been highlighted as emblematic of what LGBT people want in the public sphere are not those rights, right? So the establishment can stand behind and say, we will never abandon gay people, because what they mean by that is that we'll never abandon something like a supportive gay marriage, which ultimately does not imperil their financial interests, in the same way that paying Black people, everybody obviously, but paying people a living wage, reparations, anything like that will actually have a more systemic effect. And if we were talking about LGBT rights that had to do with more material concerns, like the fact that trans youths are overrepresented among the homeless, with 1 out of every 5 trans teens experiencing homelessness, the fact that Medicare for All was going to give make gender affirming surgery free for people, all of these other kinds of rights and interests that do threaten the status quo, then I don't think you would see Democrats pounding their chests quite so hard saying, we're never going to abandon the LGBTQIA people. We'd hear a very different story. But they've redefined what it means to support gay rights in the least threatening way possible.
Absolutely. And I know we got CJ in the back. I'm not sure, how are we doing on time, CJ?
Oh, you're good. You're good till 6. Actually.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. I thought it was 90 minutes, which is good. Which is okay.
Yeah, you're good till 6.
Okay. We have another segment because
I was concerned. I was eating, and my wife was like, "Hey, I think you're supposed to come up because he's saying something." That's why I came back.
The schedule. That's okay though. That's okay.
No, that's fine. So if you don't mind, is 30 maybe 25 more minutes? Is that fine for both of you? Yes.
All right. Cool.
Okay.
So,
well, if Bree made a face, if you do need to go, just let Nick know, and but I'm gonna pop back out and finish my dinner. Okay. All right. So enjoy.
Okay. So good. We got. I like that. We still got much to talk about, because I told you I wanted to hear more about the story, because this is something I actually share with people all the time. And whenever people say, "Oh, we're a real democracy," I always tell the story of my most infamous ratio ever. Like, I don't get ratioed a lot on Twitter, but I got my ass beat by John Legend, because John Legend came at me one time where I was like, yo, I actually don't think, like, it was one of my fuck Joe Biden posts where I was like, I'm voting third party. And John Legend was like, if you let Trump win, that will be the end of our democracy. And I got ratioed to death because John Legend obviously like 1,000 times more popular than me. And whenever I see people say stuff like that, I'm like, you think we live in a democracy right now when we had Jill Stein, who was arrested for trying to debate. So I'm gonna pass it to you, Jill, because I actually been very interested in hearing this story from yourself, and this also can be a very broad question on like the resistance that you face from the Democratic Party and the establishment as a whole, challenging from a third party. What exactly happened? Because I use that as an example all the time. Did the Democratic Party really like prevented you from voting? The floor is yours.
So what happened at that debate, which was at, God, I forget the name of the university, in New York, it'll come to me. Sherry Honkala, who was my running mate, and I went to the debate with the intention of mainly bearing witness, because you can't, it's pretty hard to force your way into a debate. But we wanted to at least sort of symbolically do that by just showing up and getting in and watching. And of course, we didn't have tickets because we weren't part of the DNCs, we weren't on their special guest list, of course. And so we just tried to walk in, and they stopped us, and they physically stopped us. And then we just kind of sat down and we refused to leave. This was at the entryway to the university. So we didn't actually get into the grounds. We were just trying to get into the grounds to get close to the debate. And they were treating us like we were some kind of terrorists or something. And so we were arrested, and we were taken to an undisclosed location. We were driven in a squad car, and we were handcuffed to these metal chairs in this very large room, as if they had expected a huge riot. And there was a whole processing station. There was one other person that was brought in the whole night, who was a reporter that was supposed to have gone to Chelsea Manning's trial the next day, and he was detained so that he couldn't get out and get to the trial. He was trying to go there to report. And he seemed like he was a political arrest, and he didn't understand why he was arrested. And so we were just handcuffed and treated like we were really some kind of dangerous prisoners, for 7 hours until the debate was over and everyone had gone home, so that we couldn't become, a matter of interest to the press. And we were then just because we had given our cell phones and everything to our friends and colleagues before we were arrested, because we didn't want to lose them in custody. And so we were just thrown out. We had no idea where we were. We had no money. We didn't have phones. Our staff didn't know where we were. And we were just wandering the street at 11 o'clock at night. And we wandered our way into a 24/7 convenience store. And the guy was really nice and let us use his cell phone. And so we called our staff and we got back. But, that's the state of our democracy, that political opponents, political challengers are treated like you are some kind of, terrorists, and you're handcuffed and, blocked from talking to the press, and from the press from even, learning about what happened.
Liberals will have you believe that stuff like that will only happen in Russia or only happen in China. I still remember where they were saying, "Oh, Venezuela, Nicaragua, they have all these fraudulent elections." I'm like, guys, in Nicaragua, they had 6 people on the ballot. What are you guys talking about? Not only do we only have a small number of people on the ballot, they don't even allow them to debate. And I actually remember during the Georgia Senate race where you had, I think his name was Perdue. He was running against Ossoff. And he debated him before. They already had a debate, but then John Ossoff, he called for a rematch. And then he was like, "No, we already debated before." And then the establishment melted down. I remember he was trending on Twitter for 2 days because they were like, "Oh, Perdue's a coward," despite the fact that they already debated. Meanwhile, they wouldn't allow Joe Stein to debate. And Nancy Pelosi, our House Speaker, when the last time you seen her in the debate? But meanwhile, tell me more about your democracy. I always like to show this because this was unbelievable why it was happening, because this is my most legendary ratio of all time. You guys see it? Because John Legend and his whole crew went after me because I had this based ass take that aged well as hell. This aged super well. I'm not getting into it, but this is what John Legend, what he's saying. He said, "Imagine thinking we'll have a functioning democracy if Trump get reelected." Now, you heard Joe Stein's story. You see how they're fighting third-party candidates and forcing them off the ballots. This is the kind of stuff that Democrats wouldn't do. You know, the whole Freedom to Vote Act that everyone was melting down about, that we was warning you guys about, third parties may disappear from ballot under Freedom to Vote Act. So there's an active war that's being waged against third parties. And I would love to open it up to you guys and very broadly, like, what do you guys see as a strategy as third party activists to fight against the Democratic Party and the people who want to censor third party and stop them from debating? Because that's going to be such a giant like hurdle for us to climb, like as third party activists. Like, they've been forcing people illegally off the ballot in 2020. So I'm talking. I guess we go Bree first, then we go Joe Stein. Do you guys have any response to that?
I am hesitant to talk about third party candidates as kind of tools as opposed to legitimate candidates in and of themselves who should be trying to win. Like, I think I really just want to say that it's not like symbolic voting for me. It's, you know, I would like these people to win, but I also feel like I have to recognize that other people feel differently. They feel like the odds are so extreme that they need other reasons to vote for third party candidates. And if I can offer an argument in the alternative, in addition to I want them to win, it's the articulating the benefits to getting candidates that are more able to win because of funding and those things by getting them to 5%. I think for lots of folks, that's a tangible goal that makes them feel like their vote isn't wasted in the ways we described before. But I also think, and obviously this is a drum I've been beating since the summer of 2020, that it is useful to have third parties as a bucket in which people can put their votes, a place for them to pledge their votes, and the alternative to the major parties when they want to express discontent with something that's going on. Because I do think not only at the end of the day, after election day, do votes for third parties get framed differently than people who stay at home. And it's more easy to make the case that you are politicizing your vote and your choice not to vote Democrat and say, this is what I want you to be. I'm not staying home because I'm indifferent to Trump or because I secretly love Trump or something. No, I voted for this candidate that is far to the left of the Democratic Party. But also it's because it helps people feel like they're together as one part of a movement together and not just disparate people who are kind of independently pissed off at Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden. And when I was writing articles about withholding one's vote and the power that could come from that and the lack of power the Black community has because it does vote so faithfully in such a block, an unprecedented block for groups, ethnic groups in the United States, I wish that there were some institution that you could be a part of, that could articulate your preferences in the same way that we used to have more organized labor and politicians would have to court the votes of those kinds of groups. Absent that, because as you know, on my show, I go round and round in circles with people who say, well, the solution to this is organizing. Okay, well, how do we organize? Okay, well, we don't have the union density to be able to organize, and round and round and round. Fine. I agree that we should have labor density and we should be able to do work stoppages and all of those kinds of things. And I will support you day and night in getting us back to that place. In the interim, however, I do think it's useful to think creatively about other kinds of organizational structures that can similarly be courted and votes be delivered. And to the extent that you can do something with a third party like Ralph Nader did, to say, here's a list of 20 demands, do some of these and I won't even run. I'm not saying literally argue that you won't run, but do some of these and we can talk. I have that kind of leverage. And to be able to say, maybe I'm Bernie Sanders and just ran for president and 30% of the Democratic Party is with me. Yeah, I'll drop out sooner rather than later if you concede these things. And the alternative is that I'm going to go ahead and run third party until you actually do make these meaningful concessions, not you're gonna have a seat at the table and all of this kind of nonsense. I think that could be useful in helping masses of voters see themselves as people with power instead of just individuals making symbolic gestures.
Well, I also want to pitch this because I also have another vision of third parties and another way that we can wedge our vote, because you have a lot of conversations about like why we need to draw the line in certain areas. So this was the Green Party platform in 2020, and now I break this down many times, but I call this this is about as pro-black of an agenda you can get, right? If you're actually serious about fighting climate change, you got to address the military. You see, they actually challenge the military. 75% military budget cut. You also see something else here they don't see on a lot of people want to challenge reparations. Now, if you go through all of these in anti-discrimination law, in war on drugs, then you go to ecology, and we had a Green Party official that eloquently stated how climate change impacts disenfranchised people. So my vision is if we see a platform that is this pro-black, and as it is right now, we already talked about the numbers. The Green Party, like 0.1%, not a lot of people there. And the vision I would love to see, especially as someone who unapologetically advocates for my community, I would love to see the Green Party be the Black people party. Like, even if it's not dominating elections, like you get 5 to 10% of the vote, but then you look at the numbers, 80% that 5 to 10% is Black. Then what happens if you're a shifty politician that isn't in a heavily Black area too, and then your party loses by maybe a margin of 2 to 5%? Maybe, just maybe, they'd be more likely to pursue a Black agenda. Maybe they'd be more likely to try to win over the Black people who left to the Green Party. If not, okay, we can continue to build that movement up, right? I don't know if this strategy is foolproof. If this will work every single time, there's a lot of people that can lie. But if you're going to use electoral politics in the very few ways I think you can use it, doesn't this strategy make the most sense, right? In a little bit that you can engage in this. I would love to get Joe Stein in this, and you can respond to anything that we said, but also would love to get your take on, like, what is your optimism for the future of third parties? Because I share those stories about the Democratic Party going after third party candidates on the ballot for a reason. When I think about it, I think like the electoral prospects of it is grim. I would love to get your honest thoughts on that, or you can respond to anything that we said as well that you wanted to chime in on. Floor is yours, Joe.
All right, great. So, like first, well, there's a lot there between what Bree said and what you said. So let me just grab a few pieces of it. Like Green Party as a party for the Black community. I mean, we were really aware of that. And by we, I mean Ajamu and myself in 2016, that our agenda was really, we were really the only ones, on reparations, on Medicare for all, on the right to housing. I mean, all the stuff that matters, especially to the most oppressed communities, the communities of color, were there. And we had really great chemistry, if I can say that. It felt like our chemistry with the African-American community was really wonderful. I mean, a lot of people didn't want to talk to us at all just because we weren't Democrats. But when we could get beyond that, it was really wonderful. And I'd say we were also the party for youth, for millennials, and for Gen X and Gen Z. We were the only ones really speaking to the future on many counts, on getting out of debt, on the climate, on the right to a job. I mean, all the ways that the younger generation is being slammed in the same ways that, the communities of color and the African-American community in particular are being slammed. It felt like the chemistry was just really great, and we had wonderful live events in the communities, and we could have done it forever. It just felt really wonderful, and it was mutually really empowering. And so, I love your suggestion that, can we make the party a vehicle for particular communities? And I think that's a really great idea, and it would be wonderful to follow up on that in an operational way, so like, are we building, is it social movement stuff that we use to build this relationship? Is it, starting party chapters? Is it running candidates? What is it? It requires some strategizing and some real, practical work. I also want to just throw out that we're not obviously just talking about president. I mean, president is really important because that's where war happens and, the budget and so many big decisions. But it's also really hard to get elected there. It's really hard to get elected as a third party. Once you rise above the community level, there's all kinds of resistance. But in many ways, I think it's much easier if we could concentrate national energy on getting a couple of breakthrough elections, and this was what Canada did to get their first parliamentarian elected as a Green. They brought in like 1,000 volunteers on day one of her election. They selected a community and she moved there where they thought there was, a lot of just grassroots support for the Greens and the Green agenda. And so they aimed at the level of Parliament and they mobilized national resources to do that. And I think that's really something that should be seriously considered. Still, I think we should run someone for president, but maybe that's not where we throw most of our resources. Maybe we mobilize national resources to get a person elected to Congress or a couple of state rep, electeds would be really great too. And along those lines, I want to throw out Matthew Ho, who is running for Senate in North Carolina, and really amazing, powerful candidate, veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan, who was a State Department official. He was sort of elevated up the food chain. He actually served 3 times, 3 tours of duty, and eventually got elevated to a State Department appointment in Afghanistan, where he quit in a very public way. He quit to protest Obama's surge, because by that time he had just kind of learned what a scam the whole thing was. And he's just been a really outspoken and eloquent anti-war, pro-social justice, public servant and advocate. And I really encourage people to check out his campaign, because this could be one of those races where we, nationally, we converge. And I don't mean just Greens, but I mean people who want to see a breakthrough in the corporate stranglehold on our lives and our political system. Get behind Matthew Ho. Let's have a breakthrough, because it benefits us all to put the bipartisan predators on notice that their days are numbered, that we, the people, are rising up, we're breaking through, and we're going to have a voice, and we're going to get behind that voice. And, I think that would be really cool. So check out Matthew Ho's campaign and see how you can get involved. He's fighting one of those oppressive ballot access battles right now, but it's not horrible. It's a doable ballot access hurdle, but that's kind of the focus right now. So yeah, I'll stop there, just to generalize though, saying that, we don't have to just think about president, and we don't just have to think about how do we get through to people who are terrified of the greater evil, of Trump at the presidential level. People are less terrified, although the Democrats will try to stir up, fear and terror at all levels of government. Wherever you're running, they will try to do it. But in some ways, it's easier to push back against that at lower levels of office. And we should be looking for other strategic opportunities, I think, all the time for where we can break through. Because once you start to break through, it's like what Briahna was saying about, well, if you're aiming for something pragmatic like 5%, it just really helps people get behind it. In the same way, it's sometimes easier to get people to mobilize at a level that's closer to the community level. And once you then break through at the community level, it's easier to go up from there. So I think that's part of many strategy options that we can be pushing on.
Yeah, well said. There was so much to learn, and I have a lot of these conversations, but definitely the one before Joe Stein, I was definitely very nervous because you're someone I looked up to for quite a while. Learned a lot from you as well. So for the last 5 minutes, I want to start with Bree. Any last final thoughts you want to give on the topic of third parties. If you want to respond to anything that we said recently, it's kind of a great chance to get final thoughts before we read some super chats and preparation of the next segment. So, floor is yours. Thank you for joining us as well, Bree.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. All I want to say is that my mom called me at some point when we were on air, and I texted her back, "I'm sorry, I can't talk. I'm streaming with Dr. Jill Stein." And she says, "Oh, yay, 3 exclamation points. Tell her she gave me hope and that her courage is inspiring. 4 hearts."
Oh, wow.
So I share that sentiment. I definitely learned about voting third party from my mother. It runs in the family, and I want to see the floor to Dr. Stein to close this out.
Oh man, well, I'll just say I'm really grateful because we're only as good as the links between us. One by one, we're like totally powerless. But I think the work that you do, Bree, is so inspiring, and you're such a hero to so many people because you've really taken it on the chin and have just had you've just had exemplary courage in how you don't even like defend against it. You just like supercharge, above it. It's really wonderful and inspiring. And I am so glad to be in touch with this network because your courage and
we gotta hook up during the Earth Day strikes because we definitely gonna be on the front like promoting that. I'm gonna look more into it. I'm gonna look more into it and see what we can do because that's the kind of action we literally like. If you watch our streams, that's what we advocate for. People like Nick, you talk about a lot of depressing stuff. What should we do? Strikes. What should we do? Mutual aid. I don't know what else to tell you guys. So we 100% gonna be promoting that. So I'm glad that you brought that to our attention, and it's always good to talk to you, Dr. Stein.
Likewise.
Yes, and I just came on to thank both of you ladies, Dr. Stein and BJG. Thank you for. I know both of you are busy. I know Briahna, you're very busy, so I appreciate your time. And also Dr. Stein, I know you're very busy, and I appreciate your time. Actually, you're going to be back with us again on Sunday, so we get a double dose of you, which is great. So everybody watching get another chance to watch her same time or a little bit earlier, 7 p.m. Eastern on this Sunday. So check that out. But thank you both.
Thank you. This has been great.
Yeah, it's really been wonderful.